The Acolyte so far I think is flawed, but I do think there is some potential for the show. It is obviously hard to draw conclusions off of only the first 2 episodes, since they surmount to just an hour of screen time, which is ridiculous on its own, and is essentially like opening up a bag of Doritos and it being half empty. The Acolyte isn't as egregiously bad writing-wise as some of the other shows. There are still some issues like Osha getting detained by the Jedi for killing one of their masters, and instead of escorting her to Coruscant themselves, they throw her onto this generic prison ship. Which is pretty wild that they do this given her importance, and they were also already going back to Coruscant themselves. These 2 Jedi literally have to go out of their way to put her on a separate ship that would also definitely be less secure. And they even acknowledge that she went through Jedi training, so she could possibly still be attuned to the Force and should from their perspective, since she presumably just killed a Jedi Master. But hey, she's not dangerous enough to warrant us taking her back ourselves. This in general is a pretty major contrivance because the story fundamentally wouldn't work if Osha actually made it back to Coruscant, because then realistically, she'd probably be thrown into a cell for most of the season. Some other minor points is May escaping at the end of episode 2 where she blasts all the sand up into the air. Firstly, the sand on the ground looks more like gravel and probably wouldn't create this massive cloud. And secondly, all Sol had to do was force push the cloud away, which would immediately remove the smoke screen. Instead, he just sits there dumbfounded. Also, I thought Jedi Masters around this point in time knew how to run faster like in The Phantom Menace. So, Sol casually watching May escape in a vehicle as he slowly walks up to Osha feels pretty convenient for the antagonist to say the least. I know that these are all skills that Jedi have to be trained for, but realistically, if you're a Jedi Master in this period of time where so much knowledge has been passed down over generations, then you should probably know the vast majority of them and even new Force abilities that we haven't seen. We're at a point where Jedi have so many Force abilities that when there's a moment where they should use one to overcome an obstacle and don't, it immediately comes off as a contrivance for the writing. So to me, there really shouldn't have been a situation where May could have escaped, or at least coming up with a better way out for the character that doesn't nerf the protagonist into not using the skills they have. I hope this doesn't become a recurring issue because it really makes the writing stand out in a bad way. Besides that, the story so far is pretty straightforward and is simple. I feel like the writers are putting all of their eggs into the basket as to whether or not the mystery that's driving the show really pays off. Because that's honestly the only thing that intrigues me. Especially since the show spends the vast majority of its time talking about the past. Most scenes are driven by exposition, and this in turn made me not really care about most of the characters. They aren't bad, and they're just not that interesting to me so far. This is also because the pace of the show is so fast that they haven't really developed the characters that much yet. I'm sure we'll get more natural development over the duration of the season that in turn makes these characters more interesting. Sol so far is kind of a standout, but at the same time, I feel like his fundamental character doesn't really stand out amidst the large roster of Jedi characters that we have. I saw someone comment that he's essentially Qui-Gon Jinn, and now I can't unsee that comparison. In general, it feels like a lot of writers fall into the trap of writing Jedi as solely being samurai-type characters. Like Ahsoka as an example, came off in the end as being pretty mundane and dull, and I prefer the Jedi characters that are more colorful and have quirks like Obi-Wan, and really anyone from the prequels. That's what makes them more likable and gives them a sense of uniqueness, and none of them come across as carbon copies. So I kind of had the same impression for Sol so far, and I hope the following episodes does more with him as a character, and the same thing with everyone else honestly. He's still enjoyable, and I think the actor does a pretty good job. But given that the pace is so fast, and the overall focus seems to predominantly be on the revenge plot, I wouldn't be surprised if the depth for these characters remains rather shallow. Then another aspect of the story that they briefly allude to is the wider politics within this world. Like there's one line on Coruscant where this Jedi talks about the negative implications of the news of Jedi being hunted down by their own kind, and how the politics of that can negatively infect them. Now to me, one of the best aspects of Andor was the world building and how the political conflict greatly impacted and influenced the characters involved with said narrative. For the Acolyte, I hope the same thing happens here, and the narrative isn't solely focused on the simple revenge plot. Because we're in a completely new era, or kind of new, and exploring the larger world and expanding on the lore I feel like would be a must from a writing perspective. There's so much value and interesting new avenues you can go down for expanding this universe, and I'd be pretty disappointed if they only use this time period to tell a small scale and personal revenge story. That inherently kind of feels like a cop-out for writing a story that should be much more complex, and is one reason why Andor is beloved by fans. The ambition for the narrative needs to be bigger, and I hope that improves over the course of the season. If that doesn't happen though, I'm sure the overall story will still be fine, but it feels like the potential for greatness would be just out of reach. Then for the action, I assume most people are satisfied so far, but I expect far greater from a big budget production. The action always looks and is shot in a bland way, and the issue that always annoys me the most is the complete lack of creativity when it comes to the choreography. We're in a universe where these characters have the Force, and the fact that they only briefly use it to jump slightly higher, push people, or freeze them for 2 seconds is so boring and lacks imagination. Imagine if Jackie Chan had access to the Force and was able to use that for his action choreography. It would go so hard, and even without that, his fight scenes are still action brilliance. For the Acolyte, the fact that there is practically zero interaction with the environment for these action scenes is so disappointing. It makes the action come across as being unmemorable and is wholly undynamic. They should be force pulling objects off walls, collapsing this catwalk or reforming the set to their needs, and in general using the Force more often or even combining more abilities together. It's just so disappointing to me that the action so far kind of just surmounts the basic martial arts, but I don't know, I just want and expect better with a premise that could lend to some outstanding action. Like, these are action scenes with masters who are narratively at the top of their games, and I never really get the impression that these are actually masters. They should be doing some insane shit that wows the audience, and I feel like it would be a dream to have the chance to choreograph these scenes. Or maybe it goes past that, and the higher-ups don't want to spend that much money on the action, and actually train their actors for longer. We'll essentially see how the action pans out over the course of the show, and hopefully, the lightsaber duels are better. But we all know that there have essentially been no standout action scenes from any of the Disney Plus shows so far, which is pretty crazy. And in general, I wish the investment into action was on the level of the prequels. I know I've spent most of this video critiquing and pointing out flaws within the Acolyte, and I don't intend for this to be mean-spirited. I genuinely want this to be the best it can be since the show has the greatest potential given its setting. This is what we've been wanting, and I hope that the showrunner doesn't squander their opportunity in delivering a story that ends up just being fine quality-wise in the end. Like, the dialogue definitely isn't on par with Andor, the characters are mostly okay, the plot is kind of alluring, even though you can probably predict where it's going, and I hope there's some kind of tangible twist that shatters our expectations. The production value in terms of sets is pretty solid, even though the way these shows are shot does them no favors and makes them feel unremarkable and uncinematic. Like, even though everyone hated The Last Jedi, at least the cinematography was stellar for that movie, and the pace so far is pretty cracked. It makes me miss Andor for how much time it allowed its narrative to breathe and for its characters to properly develop. That's the impression I have so far, but hey, I wasn't really vibing with Andor during its first 2 episodes, and The Acolyte still has the potential to become a better show. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I have enough time to do an overall review of the show since I'll be pretty busy with House of the Dragon Season 2. Thank you as always to Logan Farmer for being my top patron.